Interview transcript. Detective Michael Ramirez, Lakeview Police Department. Lakeview is a place where everyone knows each other, or thinks they do. The population is just over 8,000. The town is located on the shores of Silver Lake, hence the name. It's a typical American town with a main street, a municipal library, and an annual summer festival. When a murder happens here, it's always a shock to everyone, especially when the victim and the killer are respected members of the community. Robert McKenzie came to Lakeview almost 20 years ago. He started with a small construction crew, and within 5 years he owned the most successful construction company in the county. McKenzie Construction built cottages for wealthy residents around the lake and renovated the historic center of Lakeview. Robert was a typical workaholic. He got up early, came home late, and never missed a town meeting. At 52, he looked fit and energetic, with dark hair streaked with gray and a face that was always tanned from his frequent visits to construction sites. Elizabeth arrived in town 15 years ago when she came to work on the design of a newly built public library. Elegant and with impeccable taste, she immediately caught the attention of the locals, Roberts in particular. Interview transcript, Martha Jenkins, librarian. "Oh, I remember the day Elizabeth walked into our building. She looked like a movie star who had lost her way in our backwater, tall, slender, with shoulder-length brown hair. She spoke softly but confidently. There was something mysterious and enigmatic about her. We all wondered where a woman like her had come from in our little town of Lakeview. I have to say, her work was beyond praise. The library still looks like it was designed by a big city architect." The story of how Robert and Elizabeth met became a local legend. He came to the library's grand reopening after it had been renovated, saw her, and didn't leave her side all evening. 3 months later, they were married. It was a modest ceremony, attended only by close friends. No one came from Elizabeth's side. She said she grew up in a foster family in Oregon. Her parents were no longer alive, and she didn't have a good relationship with her foster relatives. Interview transcript, Lauren Wilson, Elizabeth's friend. Elizabeth didn't like to talk about her past. I met her when she was setting up my flower shop on Main Street. We became friends and often met for coffee. But even to me, she said very little about her childhood and youth. You know, some people have so much pain behind them that they prefer to leave it behind. Elizabeth was just like that. She lived in the present. She created beauty around her. And she loved Robert very much, truly. After the wedding, Elizabeth moved her design studio to Lakeview. Elizabeth Interiors quickly gained popularity not only in their town, but also in neighboring communities. She often collaborated with her husband's company. He built houses, she decorated them. It was the perfect family business. They had everything except children. People in town whispered about it, but Robert always shut down the conversation. Elizabeth and I are happy together. And indeed, from the outside, they seemed like the perfect couple. Their house on Ivy Street, in the historic Lakeview neighborhood, became a model of style and taste. It was a 2-story Victorian mansion with a veranda, surrounded by a garden that Elizabeth had personally landscaped. Every year at Christmas, they hosted a reception for the town's elite. Robert was a member of the city council, and Elizabeth headed the culture committee. They donated to charity and sponsored school programs. From the McKenzie perspective, they were the embodiment of the American dream. Interview recording, Dr. Sarah Novak, chief physician at Lakeview Clinic. Our town has a tradition of annual medical checkups for all residents, free of charge. It's a good practice for a small town. Robert was in perfect health for his age, except for slightly high blood pressure. But Elizabeth, she always found reasons to put off her visit. A business trip, an urgent project. In her 15 years in Lakeview, she never seemed to have had a full checkup. She only went to the doctor for colds, and even then, rarely. I didn't think much of it until that incident happened. Behind the flawless facade of the McKenzie's life lay oddities that the town preferred to ignore. For example, the mysterious phone calls Elizabeth received every few months. After them, she always became pensive, sometimes disappearing for a day or two on studio business to neighboring towns. Robert never accompanied her on these trips. Interview transcript, Sean Bryant, Robert's assistant. The boss was one of those old-school guys who believed in personal space. He never checked his wife's phone or made a scene out of jealousy. Although, to be honest, I sometimes thought he was too busy with work and didn't notice the obvious things, like the fact that his wife always tensed up when the conversation turned to her past, or those strange phone calls. One day I took some documents to their house and heard her talking on the phone in the study. I caught a snippet of the conversation, "Still under control, stop worrying." Then she noticed me and abruptly changed the subject and her tone. I decided it was none of my business. But even these minor inconsistencies couldn't cloud the picture of the McKenzies' happy life. After 15 years together, they still held hands when they walked along the Silver Lake Promenade. Elizabeth always cooked her husband's favorite meals, and Robert gave her flowers for no reason. They could afford to travel to Europe, but most often spent their vacations together at their lake house an hour's drive from Lakeview. Everything changed one May morning when Elizabeth slipped on the wet floor in her studio and hit her head hard. A concussion and a broken arm were enough to land her in the hospital. It was then that Dr. Sarah Novak made a discovery that shattered the McKenzie family's perfect life and ultimately led to tragedy. It was quiet at Lakeview Clinic, as it usually was at night. Dr. Sarah Novak was reviewing Elizabeth McKenzie's test results when she noticed some strange discrepancies. At first, she thought it was a lab error. Interview transcript. Dr. Sarah Novak. I've been in medicine for over 20 years. Half of that time I've worked at Lakeview. I'm used to trusting my eyes and my experience. When I looked at Elizabeth's hormone test results, something alarmed me. The readings weren't normal for a woman her age. I double-checked the results, twice. Then I asked for the tests to be repeated. Only after confirming that there were no errors did I begin to study her medical history in more depth. Dr. Novak requested Elizabeth's medical records from her previous places of residence. Officially, she had lived in Portland, Oregon, before moving to Lakeview. However, the records from there were sparse. A few visits for colds, nothing significant. There was no mention of chronic illnesses, major surgeries, or other health problems. It was as if Elizabeth's entire medical history had started from scratch 15 years ago. I tried to gently ask the patient about her health. She was evasive, claiming that she had always been healthy and rarely seen a doctor. When I asked her directly about hormone therapy, her expression changed. She said it must be a mistake and asked to be discharged as soon as possible. I couldn't keep the patient against her will, but I advised her to stay under observation for at least 24 hours because of the concussion. She reluctantly agreed. That same night, a conversation took place in the hospital ward that would later become key to the entire case. Lauren Wilson, Elizabeth's closest friend, came to visit her after closing her flower shop. Hospital surveillance camera recording, dialogue transcript. Lauren, how are you feeling? Elizabeth, better. I'll be discharged tomorrow. My head hardly hurts anymore. Lauren, I brought your things from the studio, and also, Ellie, I think we need to talk. Elizabeth, about what? Lauren, Dr. Novak called me. She asked if I knew about any health problems you have, about the medications you're taking. Elizabeth, long pause. What did you tell her? Lauren, nothing, of course, I would never. But Ellie, she suspects something. Tests, she said, something with your hormones. Elizabeth, quietly, damn it. I knew this would happen someday. Lauren, maybe it's time to tell Robert. 15 years, Ellie. You've been together for 15 years. He loves you. Elizabeth, you don't understand. Robert is a man of certain views. He's old school, he'd never... Shakes her head. No, I need time. I need to plan everything carefully. Lauren, plan what? Run away? Ellie, this is crazy. You can't run away from your life, from your husband, your home, your business. Elizabeth, what if he finds out? Then what? You think he'll just accept it? Oh, honey, what a trifle that you were born a man. Let's continue our happy life. End of recording. At that moment, none of the women noticed the orderly changing the IV in the next room. Jeremy Foster, 26, worked night shifts at the hospital and was in his final year of medical school. He was also the nephew of Sean Bryant, Robert McKenzie's right-hand man. Interview transcript, Jeremy Foster, ripped. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, really. But they were talking pretty loudly and the doors between the rooms are thin. When I heard that Mrs. McKenzie was born a man, it was a shock. I knew their family. Who in Lakeview doesn't know the McKenzies? Mr. Robert had always been kind to me, helping me pay for my education after my father died. I didn't know what to do with this information. At first, I decided to keep quiet. It was medical confidentiality. But then, I told my Uncle Sean. Only him. No one else. I thought he might be able to help the situation somehow. Sean Bryant wasn't just Robert's assistant. They had been friends for 20 years. Sean felt it was his duty to tell his boss what he had learned. Interview recording, Sean Bryant. Look, I'm not proud of what I did. Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut. But I'd known Robert for so many years. He'd always been honest with me, always helped me. And suddenly it turns out that his wife isn't even a woman? That she, or rather, he, had been cheating on him all these years? I thought Robert had a right to know. So I told him. It was the hardest conversation of my life. Robert McKenzie didn't believe it at first. He refused to believe it. He called the information nonsense and told Sean never to bring it up again. But the seed of doubt had been sown. That same evening, while Elizabeth was still in the hospital, Robert returned home alone. The house seemed empty without his wife. He poured himself a whiskey, more than usual, and went up to their bedroom. Without knowing why, he began looking through Elizabeth's things. In the back of her closet, he found a locked mahogany box. There was no key, but the lock gave way to a screwdriver. Inside were documents belonging to James Edward Baird, a birth certificate, an old passport, a school report card, a photograph of a young man with brown hair and familiar eyes, and several medical reports on hormone therapy. Letters from a doctor in Chicago dated 2008 to 2009, just before Elizabeth appeared in Lakeview. Reconstruction of events based on Robert McKenzie's testimony. Robert sat on the bedroom floor, surrounded by documents, devastated and shaken. 15 years of his life had been built on a lie. The woman he loved, with whom he shared his bed, his dreams, his plans, was a biological man. A man named James Baird, who had changed his appearance, his body, his personality, and never told Robert. Robert didn't sleep a wink that night. He reread the documents, looked at the photos, trying to connect the image of the young James with the woman he knew as Elizabeth. By morning, his confusion had turned to cold rage. While Robert was tormented by his discovery, Dr. Novak continued her investigation. She was concerned not only about her patient's health, but also about the moral and ethical aspects of the situation. Interview transcript. Dr. Sarah Novak. I was in a difficult position. On the one hand, medical ethics require confidentiality. On the other hand, I had known the McKenzies for many years. I knew that Robert had always wanted children, but Elizabeth had always avoided the subject. Now I understood why. I contacted a colleague at a clinic in Chicago whose initials appeared on some of the documents in Elizabeth's file. Without mentioning any names, I described the symptoms and test results. He confirmed my suspicions. The patient had most likely undergone long-term hormone replacement therapy after gender reassignment surgery. That same day, Dr. Novak scheduled an additional examination for Elizabeth before her discharge. The conversation was difficult. I told her that I knew about her situation. I didn't judge or pressure her, I just offered help. As a doctor and as a person who wanted the best for her. Elizabeth denied everything at first, then burst into tears. She told me that she was born James Baird in a small town in Idaho. Since childhood, she had felt that she was in the wrong body. At the age of 22, after receiving an inheritance from her grandmother, she began the transition process. First came the hormones, then the surgeries at a clinic in Chicago. After the last surgery, she changed her documents and started a new life as Elizabeth. She met Robert when the process was already complete. Elizabeth confessed to the doctor that she had always been afraid of revealing her secret, especially after she realized how conservative Robert was about such issues. She loved her husband and didn't want to lose him. That's why she had kept silent all these years. I asked her if she planned to tell her husband the truth. Elizabeth replied that she wanted to, but was afraid of his reaction. She asked for a few days to prepare herself mentally. I agreed, but warned her that in a small town, secrets rarely stay secret for long. That evening, Elizabeth was discharged from the hospital. Lauren Wilson picked up her friend and took her home. Elizabeth had asked her to do so, saying she wanted some quiet time before the serious conversation with her husband. Interview transcript. Lauren Wilson. Ellie was in terrible shape. not so much because of her injuries, but because of her fear. She knew her secret was out, and that she couldn't put off the inevitable any longer. We talked all night. She told me her whole story, from her childhood in Idaho to her move to Lakeview. How hard it was for her to live in a boy's body, how she saved up for the surgery, how she created her new identity. You know, Ellie's story is a story of courage. She was born in the wrong body, but she found the strength to change that. She reinvented herself. And then she met Robert and truly fell in love with him. She wanted to tell him the truth from the very beginning, but she was afraid. And the longer they were together, the harder it became to confess. I always told her that secrets have a way of coming out at the worst possible moment. Recording of a phone conversation between Elizabeth and an unknown caller the evening before the tragedy. Unknown. Did you get my last letter? Elizabeth. Yes, Michael. The money arrived on time. Unknown. Michael. I'm worried about you, Jamie. 15 years of this lie. It's too long. Elizabeth. Don't call me that. I'm Elizabeth. James died many years ago. Michael. To the law, maybe, but not to me. You're my brother, no matter what you do with your body. Elizabeth. Sighs. I'm going to tell Robert the truth tomorrow. It's over, Mike. My secret is out. Michael. God, Jamie. I mean, Ellie. What are you going to do? Elizabeth. I don't know. Maybe I'll leave. Start over somewhere else. Michael. You can always come back to Boise. Stay as Elizabeth if you want. Just be closer to your family. Elizabeth. To you, you mean. You're my only family, Mikey. Michael. You know I'm always on your side, even if I don't understand your choices. End of recording. This conversation was intercepted by the police after the murder. It clarified the identity of the mysterious caller Elizabeth had been calling regularly. Michael Bird, James, Elizabeth's brother, was the only family member who had kept in touch with her after her transformation. It was him Elizabeth visited every few months to see her brother and his family in Boise, Idaho. The next morning, Robert woke up with a heavy head after a sleepless night and several glasses of whiskey. The first thing he saw was a photograph of their wedding on the bedside table. Elizabeth, in a simple white dress, smiled so happily, so sincerely. Had it been a deception from the beginning? Or was it true love, simply based on unspoken words? Robert called work, canceled all his meetings, and drove to Lauren Wilson's flower shop. He knew Elizabeth often went there, and now he needed to find his wife for a serious talk. Interview transcript: Cassandra Morgan, flower shop salesperson. Mr. McKenzie looked terrible when he came in, pale with red eyes as if he hadn't slept for days. He asked for Lauren, but she wasn't there yet. She usually came in after 9. Then he asked if she was his wife. I said I didn't know. He looked so lost. I offered him some coffee, but he refused. He just turned around and left. That was around 8 in the morning, a few hours before, well, you know. After his unsuccessful visit to the flower shop, Robert headed home. On the way, he stopped by his office and took something out of the safe. Something that would soon change the lives of everyone involved in this story. It was a cloudy morning in Lakeview. Heavy clouds hung over the lake, threatening a storm. Lauren Wilson opened her flower shop as usual at 9 a.m., leaving Elizabeth to rest in the apartment above the shop. Interview transcript: Lauren Wilson. Elizabeth hardly slept last night. She was going over what to say to Robert, how to explain 15 years of silence. Before I left for the shop, she finally dozed off. I left her breakfast and a note saying I'd be back at lunchtime. Around 10 in the morning, Robert McKenzie walked into Lauren's shop. Unlike earlier that morning, he now looked composed and determined. Only his pallor and dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night. CCTV footage from the flower shop. Dialogue transcript. Robert: Good morning, Lauren. Lauren: Tense. Robert: Good morning. Robert: Is my wife with you? Lauren: Pause. Robert: You need to calm down. Let's talk. Robert: Dryly: I'm perfectly calm. I just need to see Elizabeth. Lauren: She's resting. The doctor recommended rest after the concussion. Robert, approaching her: You know, Lauren, in 15 years, I've never raised my voice to her, and I need to talk to my wife, or to the person I thought was my wife. Lauren: Robert, listen. Elizabeth loves you. The fact that she didn't tell you about her past doesn't change that. Robert, with a bitter smile: Her past? You mean the fact that she was born a man? That it was all a lie? Lauren. Not all of it. Your feelings were real. Robert. Calmly. I just want to talk to her, Lauren. I won't hurt her. End of recording. Later, Lauren admits that she believed Robert. His calmness convinced her that he really just wanted to talk to his wife. She led him to the apartment above the store. Reconstruction of events based on witness testimony. Elizabeth woke up to a knock on the door. Robert was standing in the doorway of the bedroom. They stared at each other silently for a second. We need to talk, Elizabeth. If that's your real name, Robert said, entering the room. I have a lot to explain to you, she replied. Like the fact that you were born a man? That your name used to be James Bird? That all 15 years we've spent together have been based on a lie? Robert's voice remained surprisingly calm. Elizabeth took a deep breath. Yes, I was born with a male body, but inside I've always been a woman. I changed my body to match how I feel. And you didn't think it was important to tell the man you're about to marry? Robert began pacing the room, his composure giving way to anger. I wanted to tell you at the beginning, but I was afraid of losing you. And then, the longer we were together, the harder it became to admit. 15 years, Elizabeth. 15 years I dreamed of children we could never have. The neighbor across the hall, Gretchen Myers, told the police that at around 10:30 a.m. she heard loud voices coming from the apartment. A man was shouting and a woman was pleading and crying. Elizabeth tried to explain that she had never lied about her feelings, that their marriage was real. But Robert couldn't or wouldn't listen. For him, it wasn't just the illusion of a happy marriage that had collapsed. His entire self-image had crumbled. You've made a fool of me. The whole town knows, or will soon know. Robert, please, no one knows. Elizabeth tried to approach her husband, but he recoiled. Interview transcript. Haley Parker, barista at the coffee shop across the street. I was taking out the trash when I heard screaming. Then I saw Mr. McKenzie run out the back door. He looked like something inside him had broken. Elizabeth ran out after him. She called after him, trying to stop him. He got in his car and drove away, leaving her standing there in the rain. After the confrontation with his wife, Robert went to a local bar called the Silver Moose. This was unusual for him. Robert hardly ever drank, especially during the day. Interview transcript. Frank Donahue, bartender. McKenzie arrived around 11. He ordered a double whiskey, drank it in one gulp, and asked for another. He asked if everything was okay. He looked at me with a blank stare and said, Frank, have you ever felt like your whole life was someone's cruel joke? I didn't know what to say. At the same time, Elizabeth was packing her things. She decided to go to her brother's place in Boise, at least until things calmed down. Interview transcript. Lauren Wilson. Ellie was in a panic. She kept saying that it was over, that Robert would never forgive her, that she had to disappear. I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't listen. She called her brother and said she was coming over that day. By noon, word that something was wrong with McKenzie had spread throughout Lakeview. No one knew the details, but everyone sensed that something serious was happening. Interview transcript. Detective Michael Ramirez. By lunchtime that day, several concerned citizens had called the station. In situations like this, we usually don't take any action. Family disputes happen. But one call caught my attention. Sean Bryant, McKenzie's assistant, reported that a gun registered to his boss was missing from the office safe. Detective Ramirez sent a patrol car to McKenzie's house, but no one was there. At 2 p.m., Lauren went up to the apartment and found that Elizabeth was gone. There was a note on the table. I'm sorry for everything. I need to talk to Robert. Thank you for your support. Ellie. Elizabeth took a taxi to her home on Ivy Street. The driver later told the police that the woman looked ill and distraught. Interview transcript. Jeffrey Summers, taxi driver. This lady was clearly not herself. She was pale and kept looking out the window. Halfway there, she asked me to stop at a pharmacy. When I dropped her off on Ivy Street, she asked me to wait. She said she might be going further. Upon entering the house, Elizabeth discovered that Robert was already there. He was sitting in his armchair in the living room. On the table next to him was an almost empty bottle of whiskey and a gun. Transcript of Robert McKenzie's first interrogation. Ramirez. Tell me what happened in your house. Robert. I drove around town for a few hours, then I came home. I don't know why, I just didn't know where else to go. Ramirez, did you already have the gun with you? Robert nods. I took it out of the safe this morning. I wasn't going to. I just took it. Ramirez, what happened next? Robert, I was sitting in the living room drinking, thinking about our life. Then I heard the front door open. It was her. Ramirez, what happened when she came in? Robert, she looked terrible, pale, wearing someone else's clothes, but still beautiful. She saw the gun on the table and stopped in the doorway. Ramirez, did she say anything? Robert, she asked if I was going to kill her. I said I didn't know. She nodded, came into the room, sat down across from me. She said, if you want to hear the whole truth, I'll tell you. Then you can decide. End of transcript. According to Robert's testimony, Elizabeth told him her entire life story. She told him about her childhood as a boy, about being bullied at school, about her decision to change her life after receiving an inheritance from her grandmother. She told him how she created a new identity, Elizabeth. Transcript of the interrogation continues. Robert, she talked for over an hour. I just listened. At one point, she said she had never lied about her feelings, that she had truly loved me all these years. Ramirez, did you believe her? Robert, I don't know. Maybe. Part of me wanted to believe her, but another part screamed that I had been betrayed, deceived, humiliated. Ramirez, what happened next? Robert, she said she was ready to leave, to go to her brother's, start a new life. But before she left, she wanted to know one thing. Did I truly love her? Had our life together been happy? Ramirez, and what did you say? Robert, I said I didn't know anymore what was real and what wasn't, that the person I loved might never have existed. End of transcript. According to Robert, Elizabeth stood up, walked over to him, and put her hand on his shoulder. She said she would always love him. Then she headed for the door. Robert looked at the gun and thought about their life, about how the town would react when the truth came out, about his reputation, his pride, about the 15 years that seemed wasted to him. When Elizabeth was already at the door, he took the gun. Interview transcript. Jeffrey Summers, taxi driver. I waited in the car for about half an hour. I was about to leave when I heard a gunshot, then a scream, a man's. I jumped out of the car and ran to the house. In the living room, I saw Mrs. McKenzie was lying on the floor. Mr. McKenzie was standing next to her with a gun in his hand. He turned to me and said calmly, I killed my wife. Call the police. Summers immediately called 911. The police arrived 6 minutes later. Paramedics pronounced Elizabeth McKenzie dead at the scene. The bullet had hit her directly in the heart. Robert did not resist arrest. He sat on the porch of the house and voluntarily handed over the gun. When asked about what had happened, he replied briefly, I shot my wife. News of the tragedy spread through Lakeview with incredible speed. By evening, the entire town knew not only about the murder, but also about the reason behind it, the revelation of Elizabeth's secret. Interview transcript, Detective Michael Ramirez. This case divided the town. Some sympathized with Robert, considering him a victim of deception. Others sided with Elizabeth, talking about her right to privacy. Almost the entire town gathered at the funeral. Many cried, not only for Elizabeth, but also for Robert, for the life that had been cut short for both of them. Lauren Wilson was one of the few who openly supported Elizabeth. The day after the murder, she gave an interview to a local newspaper, talking about her friend's long struggle for the right to be herself. On the day of the funeral, Elizabeth's brother, Michael Baird, arrived in Lakeview. Interview recording, Michael Baird. Ellie was the bravest person I knew. When she met Robert, she was so happy. I advised her to tell him the truth right away, but she was afraid. And then it was just too late. Every year she would say, next year, Mikey. But that moment never came. Michael gave the detective several of Elizabeth's personal items, diaries, photographs, letters. These documents later became important evidence in court. Meanwhile, Robert McKenzie awaited trial in the county jail, preparing a defense based on the concept of crime in the heat of passion. Robert McKenzie's trial began in September, 4 months after the murder. He spent all that time in the county jail, refusing to see anyone except his lawyer, Gerald Fisher, a well-known defense attorney for crimes of passion. Interview recording, Gerald Fisher, lawyer. When I first met Robert, I was struck by his condition. Sitting in front of me was a completely devastated man. It was as if he were a shell. His body was there, but his soul was somewhere far away. He answered questions mechanically, showing almost no emotion. Only when the conversation turned to Elizabeth did his eyes. They filled with such a mixture of love and rage that it was unsettling. To fully understand the events of that fateful day, investigators reconstructed the timeline from the moment Elizabeth's secret was discovered to the shot that ended her life. Key evidence included witness statements, CCTV footage, cell phone records, and Robert's own confession. Official timeline of events presented in court. 7:30. Robert McKenzie arrives at his company, McKenzie Construction, and takes a gun from a safe. According to the security guard, he looks pale and confused. 8:05. Robert visits Lauren Wilson's flower shop looking for Elizabeth. Lauren has not yet arrived, and saleswoman Cassandra Morgan says she has not seen Mrs. McKenzie. 9:15. Robert returns to the shop, which has been opened by Lauren. After a brief conversation, she shows him to the apartment above the shop, where Elizabeth is resting. 9:20 to 10:05. A confrontation ensues between the spouses. Neighbors hear screams. Robert learns the full story of Elizabeth's transformation from James Baird. 10:10. Robert runs out of the apartment, gets into his car, and drives away. Elizabeth, in her home clothes, runs out after him but is unable to stop him. 10:35. Robert shows up at the Silver Moose Bar and orders a whiskey. Bartender Frank Donahue notes his strange, detached state. 11:20 a.m. Robert leaves the bar and gets into his car. A parking lot camera captures him sitting in the driver's seat for a long time without starting the engine. 11:45 a.m. Elizabeth calls her brother Michael Baird in Boise. The conversation lasts 17 minutes. She tells him she is coming to see him. 12:30 p.m. Robert arrives at their home on Ivy Street. A neighbor sees him walking unsteadily toward the porch. 1:15 p.m. Elizabeth leaves Lauren's apartment, leaving a note. She takes a taxi to the pharmacy, then to the house on Ivy Street. 1:45 p.m. Elizabeth enters the house. Taxi driver Jeffrey Summers waits in his car at her request. 2:17 p.m. A gunshot is heard. Summers runs to the house and discovers the bodies of Elizabeth and Robert with a gun in his hand. 2:19 p.m. Summers calls 911. 2:25 p.m. The police arrive at the scene of the crime. Robert McKenzie is arrested. Paramedics pronounce Elizabeth dead. At the trial, District Attorney Valerie Harper presented the jury with a detailed reconstruction of the couple's last conversation. This reconstruction was based on Robert's statements immediately after his arrest and on physical evidence found in the house. Reconstruction of the last conversation presented by the prosecutor. Upon entering the house, Elizabeth found Robert in the living room. He was sitting in his chair with an almost empty bottle of whiskey on the table. Next to him lay a gun, his hunting colt, which was usually kept in a safe in his office. "Robert?" Elizabeth stopped in the doorway when she saw the gun. "Did you come for your things?" His voice sounded strangely calm. "Or to say goodbye before you disappear, just like you disappeared from James Baird's life?" "I came to talk, to really talk." Elizabeth took a step into the room but stopped when Robert put his hand on the gun. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked bluntly. "I don't know," Robert replied honestly. "I haven't decided yet." Elizabeth nodded slowly, as if accepting his answer. Instead of running away, she entered the room and sat down in the chair opposite her husband. "I want to tell you everything," she said, "the whole truth. And then you can decide." Robert leaned back in his chair, taking his hand off the gun. "Tell me." And Elizabeth began to speak. She told him about her childhood in a conservative family in Idaho, about how, from an early age, she felt trapped in someone else's body, about the bullying at school when other children noticed that she was different, about her suicide attempt at 17, after which she vowed to find a way to live a real life. She told him about the inheritance from her grandmother that allowed her to start a new life away from her family. She told him about the first steps of her transformation, hormone therapy, surgeries. She told him about the fear, the pain, and finally the liberation when she was able to look in the mirror and see her true self. "When I met you, Robert," The transformation was already complete, Elizabeth said. Physically, I was a woman. I hoped that I could leave the past behind, create a new life, a new self. Why didn't you tell me? At the very beginning? Robert asked. I wanted to. Several times I almost decided to. But then, I saw how you reacted to the news about trans people, your jokes, your rejection. I was afraid, Robert. Afraid of losing you. And instead, you stole 15 years of my life, he said bitterly. You didn't steal them, Elizabeth exclaimed, leaning forward. Our life together was real. My love for you is real. I never pretended to love you, Robert. It was always sincere. End of reconstruction. The rest of the conversation, according to Robert, was about their life together, their plans for the future that would now never be, and his feelings of betrayal and humiliation. Elizabeth, realizing that their marriage was over, suggested that she leave quietly, leaving Robert the house and most of their jointly acquired property. I just want to know one thing, she said at the end, standing at the door. Was our love real to you, even for a moment? Robert did not answer, or did not have time to answer. When Elizabeth turned to leave, he grabbed the gun. Interview transcript, Dr. Clara Montgomery, forensic psychiatrist. Robert McKenzie's state of mind at the time of the murder was a classic case of affect. The shock of the revelation, alcohol intoxication, and feelings of deep betrayal clouded his judgment. In such moments, people do not act rationally, but impulsively, under the influence of powerful emotions. It is interesting that Robert himself still cannot explain why he pulled the trigger. He remembers grabbing the gun. He remembers the sound of the shot. He remembers Elizabeth falling. But the interval between these events is missing from his memory. This is typical of crimes committed in a state of passion, partial amnesia of the moment of the act itself. Fisher, Robert's lawyer, built his defense on the concept of affect. He argued that his client was acting in a state of temporary insanity caused by exceptional circumstances and was unable to fully control his actions. Prosecutor Harper, on the other hand, insisted that the murder was, if not premeditated, at least deliberate. She pointed to the fact that Robert had taken the gun out of the safe in advance, which suggests a certain degree of planning. Excerpt from the prosecutor's closing argument. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a man who lost control in a moment of passion. This is a man who spent many hours thinking about his actions, who took the gun out of the safe, came home, and waited for his wife. He listened to her story, her explanations, her pleas, and then in cold blood, pulled the trigger when she turned to leave. This was not a moment of rage. It was a deliberate decision, a decision motivated not by fear or shock, but by wounded pride and homophobia. Robert McKenzie couldn't accept that his wife was once a man. He couldn't imagine what people would say, and he decided it would be easier to kill her than to live with the truth. Excerpt from the defense attorney's closing statement. My client lived a lie for 15 years, a lie he did not choose. For 15 years, he was deceived by the person closest to him. Imagine the shock he experienced when he learned the truth. Imagine the pain, humiliation, and confusion. Robert McKenzie did not plan to kill his wife. If he had wanted to, he would have done it right away, in the apartment above the flower shop. Instead, he left, trying to cope with his emotions. And when they met again, he listened to her story. He tried to understand, but the burden of the truth was too heavy, and the emotions too strong. The moment he picked up the gun was not the result of a calculated decision, but the impulsive act of a man who had lost everything. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Dozens of witnesses were heard, from Lauren Wilson and Dr. Novak to bartenders, taxi drivers, and neighbors. Michael Baird, Elizabeth's brother, presented her diaries, showing how much she feared revealing her secret and how sincerely she loved her husband. Excerpt from Elizabeth's diary, presented in court, entry dated November 7th, 6 months before the tragedy. Today is our anniversary, 14 years together. Robert gave me a silver bracelet engraved with "My only love." If only he knew. Sometimes I feel like I should tell him that he deserves to know the truth. But then I remember his face when he talks about those people who change their gender, his disgust, his incomprehension. He would never accept me, and I can't lose him. He's my whole life. Better to live a lie than lose his love. Selfish, yes, but I don't know any other way. The testimony of psychiatrists on both sides contradicted each other. Defense experts insisted that Robert acted in the heat of the moment and couldn't fully control his actions. Prosecution experts spoke of selective anger and controlled rage, pointing out that Robert was sufficiently in control of himself to wait for Elizabeth to leave before firing the shot, which suggests a certain degree of calculation. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty of second-degree murder. This meant that they did not believe he had completely lost control, but they also did not see any signs of a premeditated, well-planned murder. Judge Hansen sentenced Robert McKenzie to 15 years in prison, 1 year for each year of marriage, as journalists noted. Given his good behavior and other mitigating circumstances, he could expect parole after 10 years. Interview transcript, Detective Michael Ramirez. This case changed Lakeview. It's been almost 2 years, but the town still hasn't recovered. The McKenzie Company was bought out by investors from the state capital. The house on Ivy Street stands empty. No one wants to live there. Elizabeth's design studio closed. Lauren Wilson sold her shop and moved away. Even Dr. Novak transferred to another clinic. Too many painful memories. But the biggest change has been in the people themselves. Our quiet, conservative town was suddenly confronted with a reality that many preferred to ignore. The reality of complex human lives, identities, and choices. This tragedy made many people think about the price of prejudice, the power of fear, and the fragility of even the strongest relationships. After the tragedy, Mackenzie's estate was divided according to Elizabeth's will, which she had written a year before her death. Most of her fortune went to a charitable foundation supporting transgender people in small towns. Anticipating a possible tragic outcome, she included a clause in her will that disinherited Robert if he was responsible for her death. Michael Bird, Elizabeth's brother, became an activist for LGBT rights in conservative regions. He often speaks about his sister's story, telling of the price people pay for the right to be themselves in a society that is not ready to accept them. Lauren Wilson moved to Portland, where she opened a new flower shop and community center named after Elizabeth. She still visits Robert in prison, believing that both sides of the story deserve compassion. Interview recording, Lauren Wilson. I can't forgive Robert for what he did, but I can understand his pain. There are no absolutely bad or good people in this story. There are two people who loved each other but were divided by fear, prejudice, and bitter truths. Ellie hid her true self for fear of losing love. Robert couldn't accept the truth because of his beliefs and fear of public condemnation. In the end, they both lost everything. Dr. Sarah Novak, whose discovery set off a chain of tragic events, struggled with guilt for a long time. A debate erupted in the professional community about the limits of medical confidentiality and whether she had the right to disclose information about her patient's past. Interview transcript, Dr. Sarah Novak. I acted as I thought was professional. When I found abnormalities in the tests, I began to study the medical history more deeply. I never disclosed Elizabeth's secret to anyone outside the clinic, but I couldn't have foreseen that my questions and concerns would cause her to start preparing to come clean. Sometimes I think, what if I had just kept quiet, prescribed treatment and not dug any deeper? Would Elizabeth be alive today? Or would the truth have come out anyway, perhaps in an even more horrific way? I don't know. Medical ethics doesn't provide simple answers to questions like these. Sean Bryant, Robert's assistant, whose nephew overheard the conversation at the hospital, also left Lakeview. In an interview, he admitted that he felt partly responsible for the tragedy because he was the one who told his boss that his wife had been born a man. Excerpt from Sean Bryant's interview with a local newspaper. I thought I was doing the right thing, that Robert had a right to know. I couldn't have predicted that he would react that way. Robert was always a level-headed, calm person. In 20 years of working with him, I never once saw him lose control. But I guess everyone has a breaking point, a line they can't cross. In prison, Robert McKenzie has become withdrawn and unsociable. He refuses interviews, hardly talks to other inmates, and reads a lot. According to the prison psychologist, he still cannot forgive himself for what he did and at the same time cannot accept the truth about his wife. Excerpt from an interview with the prison psychologist. McKenzie is in a state of severe depression. He sees no meaning in the future. Everything he had, his reputation, his business, his position in society, the woman he loved, disappeared in an instant. All that remains is emptiness and an enormous, all-consuming guilt. Surprisingly, he still loves Elizabeth. In our conversations, he often returns to the happy moments of their marriage, to how beautiful, intelligent, and kind she was. And then he suddenly stops, as if remembering the deception. This duality is tearing him apart inside. The last remnant of Mackenzie's once happy life was Elizabeth's diary, which Michael gave him through his lawyer. Robert refused to read it for a long time, but eventually gave in. What he found in the pages of the diary changed his view of the whole story. Excerpt from Robert McKenzie's last interview, given 3 years after the murder. I read her diary, all 15 years of our life written in her own hand. You know what struck me the most? How sincere her love was, how real our life together was. She hid her past from me, yes, but she never pretended about her feelings. She never lied about who she was inside. Elizabeth was real, the way I knew and loved her. It's just that her path to that authenticity was more complicated than I could have imagined. I could have forgiven her. If only I had given myself time to think, time to understand. If I hadn't given in to pride, fear, anger. If only I hadn't picked up that damn gun. We could have started over. Maybe not as husband and wife, but as two people who had been the closest beings on earth for 15 years. Now it's too late. I killed not only Elizabeth, but also a part of myself. The part that was capable of loving, forgiving, understanding. And that punishment is worse than any prison. 10 years after the tragedy, in the summer of 2033, Robert McKenzie was released from prison on parole. Over the years, he had changed a lot. His hair had turned gray, he had lost weight, and his eyes were filled with deep, unrelenting sadness. Interview transcript, Michael Ramirez, former Lakeview police detective. I met McKenzie on the day of his release. By that time, I had already retired, but I wanted to see for myself how his life had turned out. He walked out of the prison gates with a small bag of belongings and Elizabeth's diary in his hands. That diary became his most precious possession. He looked lost, as if he didn't know where to go or what to do with his sudden freedom. Robert never returned to Lakeview. The town that had once been his home became a symbol of loss and tragedy. Instead, he settled in a small coastal town in a neighboring state where no one knew his story. He took a job as a carpenter at a local construction company, with no ambitions or desire for the success that had once defined his life. His only connection to the past was his regular visits to Elizabeth's grave in the Lakeview Cemetery. Once a month, he would go there, bring flowers, and sit at the grave for a long time, sometimes reading excerpts from her diary aloud. Interview transcript, Lauren Wilson. I ran into him at the cemetery about a year after his release. At first, I didn't recognize him. He had changed so much. We started talking, and I was amazed by the transformation that had taken place. Robert no longer denied Elizabeth's identity. He spoke of her as the woman he had loved and lost because of his own prejudices. He didn't blame her for deceiving him, but himself for his inability to accept the truth. Lauren Wilson continued to run the community center in Portland, which became an important place of support for trans people from small towns. Elizabeth McKenzie's name became a symbol of the fight against prejudice and fear. Michael Baird, Elizabeth's brother, published a book called My Sister Ellie, which tells the story of James's transition to Elizabeth and the tragedy that cut her life short. The book became a bestseller and was included in many college courses on gender issues and social psychology. Excerpt from My Sister Ellie. The tragedy of Elizabeth and Robert was not inevitable. It was the result of a combination of circumstances, fears, and social prejudices. Ellie was afraid of being rejected for her true identity. Robert was unable to overcome the stereotypes instilled in him by society. Both were victims of a system that leaves no room for the complexities of human nature. Lakeview has also changed. Mackenzie's story, which gained national attention, forced the townspeople to rethink their views on many issues. Tolerance programs were introduced in the local school. The city council, where Robert once served, passed a resolution protecting the rights of the LGBT community. Interview transcript, Sarah Novak, former chief medical officer at Lakeview Clinic. After that tragedy, I couldn't stay in Lakeview. The guilt was too strong. I moved to Seattle, where I founded a clinic for transgender people. Many of my patients come from towns like Lakeview, places where it's still dangerous to be yourself. I can't bring Elizabeth back, but I can help others avoid her fate. Sean Bryant, Robert's former assistant, whose decision to tell his boss about Elizabeth's secret was one of the catalysts for the tragedy, went through a deep personal crisis. He became a volunteer with LGBT organizations, trying to atone for what he considered his unintentional guilt. Excerpt from Sean Bryant's interview with a national television channel. I thought I was doing the right thing by telling Robert the truth. Now I realize that some truths need to be revealed in their own time and in their own way. We all wear masks. We all hide parts of ourselves for fear of being rejected. Elizabeth's tragedy was that her mask was too heavy to wear forever. Robert's tragedy was that he couldn't see the real person he had loved for 15 years behind that mask. The McKenzie case set a precedent in legal practice. It is often cited in court cases involving identity-based crimes and has sparked a wide debate about the limits of the state of affect as a mitigating circumstance. From Robert McKenzie's speech at a conference on transgender issues 15 years after the tragedy, I killed my wife in a moment of weakness, fear, and anger. I killed the person I had loved for 15 years, for who she was before we met, for her past, which in no way negated our present. I cannot bring Elizabeth back. I cannot undo what I have done, but I can tell our story and hope that it will help others avoid my fate. The truth does not always bring freedom. Sometimes it brings pain, fear, misunderstanding, but running away from the truth is running away from ourselves. Elizabeth ran away from her past, afraid of losing my love. I couldn't handle the reality that destroyed my worldview. In the end, we both lost everything. If I could go back to that day, I would just hug her and say, I need time to understand, but you are still the Elizabeth I fell in love with, and that will never change, no matter what your past holds. But time cannot be turned back. All that remains are memories and the hope that our story will teach others something.